My name is Norman Agoni from Shegawenda. I was the chief of Shegawenda from May 1st, 1970 to October 1989, pretty much 20 years consecutive. And I don't remember all the details, dates and everything, but we had been, and when I say we, I mean us as a tribal council and Anishinaabek people trying to get ourselves out of the authority of the different governments that regulate us and control us. And I had been hearing, even before I became chief, I grew up in Little Current. I moved out to Shegawenda October 9th, 1968. But I had, there was 9 of us in the family. I was the 3rd oldest. And we had 2 younger sisters. There was a lot of alcohol in our family. But when my 2 younger sisters became teenagers, my mom was really afraid. And by this time she was a single mom because my dad had died of an accident at 48 years old. So she was really afraid of my sisters getting drunk somewhere at a party and somebody taking advantage, and she was really worried about them getting pregnant. So that's quite a few years ago, because at that time there was an older lady named Mrs. Long who was the quote, the power of CAS on the Manitoulin Island. And she was a really strict, very strict woman. So my mom, not knowing the possible side effects or negative effects of doing something like that, totally lost control of my sisters. This Mrs. Long came in there with police and took those girls. And we couldn't even go and see them. We knew where they were. We went and tried to visit them. Even they wouldn't let my mom go and see them. And so that was a real turnoff and really concerned my mom. She wouldn't have called that lady if she knew how strict they were and restricted that we were. We couldn't visit them. So maybe just a little bit of history about. There was a man from our reserve. The last time I saw him, he was 4 years old. He lived just up the street from us in Little Current. And his mom was, she was listed in Shegawenda, but she was living in Little Current. And she had this boy about 4 years old. And I don't know how or who or whether she had called Children's Aid. And again, it was this Mrs. Long. But anyway, this little 4-year-old, that was the last time I saw him. He was about 4 years old, and I wasn't a heck of a lot older, I guess. But I found out after that this lady had given up her son because she thought it was a product of rape. She had been raped sometime before, and she thought that maybe that was why that that young man was born, or that kid was born. So, well, I never saw the kid again. But I'd heard of this Ian Long, and I never met him. Throughout the years, every once in a while I'd hear this name, and he was kind of connected somehow near Shishigwaning there. Anyway, long story short, found out that this Mrs. Long lived in Silverwater with her husband, and they had raised and adopted this this young man. And he lost his language. But he had friends. I guess he went to school with some of the kids that came to the high school in Chiging there. So he had a connection with the Shishigwaning Reserve, and he had a girlfriend there. But anyway, his best friend stole his girlfriend from him, and he got so angry, and I guess that hadn't been the first time that it had happened. And he got so angry, he went back to his place, which was in Silverwater, a few miles off the reserve. and he went and got a shotgun over there out of his home where he had been raised by this old couple. And apparently it came out in court that he had been made to believe that he was French Canadian all the time that he was being raised by this couple, Mrs. Long. She had retired from the CAS by this time. But anyway, this young man was so enraged, he went over there and he shot both them old folks right in the yard, in the garden, killed both of them. And then he went over to the reserve, and he knew where his girlfriend, or used to be his girlfriend, and his best friend were sitting on this love seat in his girlfriend's house there, and he walked in there and he killed both of them, shot both of them right there on the spot. And again, you know, that suspicion and all this time, myself as chief and some of the other chiefs in the area, we were really pressuring the government. We wanted to take over our own Children's Aid Society, because they were really strict when they took kids out of the homes, and we were almost treated like criminals if we tried to go and investigate or hear something about something. Well, you know, people want to know when they lose their kids, where are they gone, who's looking after them. But in those days, pretty much 100% of them were taken to non-native homes. And we knew they're not going to learn anything about their culture there. So we were working really hard to try and get children's aid, our own children's aid services. And we eventually did, and things were a little better, and not much better, because the funding comes from the federal and provincial government, so they still had the authority, the final say. So we had to, it was just like all of our workers were brown-faced children's aid, but they had to follow the same rules as the original children's aid did. And my sister became chief there a few years ago, and that's what she was saying. She says, we might as well just, you know, it's almost just like having the same services that we had prior for us taking over, because the staff and the authority in our children's aid services had to follow the rules, and if they didn't, then there was a threat of holding the funding back. And I haven't, once I lost office in 1989, I didn't really keep too much track of what was going on after that, but I heard it probably 5-6 years ago or more, the last time I heard it, that it wasn't much better than prior to, excuse me, prior to our tribal council taking it over. And of all of the things that, you know, like the 60 scoop and then the residential school, and again, it was just like it just seemed like the government was still working. It was another avenue, you know, to take the kids out of the home for the least little reason and put them in a non-native home somewhere. And again, they lose their culture, they lose their language, and it's pretty rough sometimes, some of them, the treatment and stuff that they learn over there, and then they come back to the reserve when they become of age, and they seem to be very angry, bitter people when they come back. There's a lot of stuff that shouldn't be happening. At one time, prior to the intervention of the larger society, the colonization, our people had everything. There was none of the crime that's going on now, and all of the nasty things that are going on in our communities. But it was a step forward, and I think now with all of this information coming out, like we had an older brother that the oldest brother, he was in residential school in Spanish for about 8 years, I think. But for some reason, we were born and raised in Sucker Creek, or also known as on Lake Omniconning. And I think I might have been 2 years old. I had one younger brother. And somehow the Indian agent at the time that was responsible for the island thought that, well, I know my dad was enfranchised, but I was listed in Wakumekong under my stepfather's name, and my sister and I. So we got 48 hours when somebody told that Indian agent that that my mom was living with this enfranchised Indian on the reserve there, and we were given 48 hours to get the hell off the reserve. And that's the only thing that saved me and my sister from going to this residential school in Spanish. And I don't ever remember seeing, at that age, up until about 7 years old, that's when I found out that we had an older brother in a school somewhere, as far as we were concerned, 1,000,000 miles away. And it wasn't referred to as residential school, it was, oh, he's in school in Spanish. And so that saved us. That was the only reason why my sister and I never went to residential school, or any of my younger siblings that were born after that. And there was nine of us all together. But my brother, and then his wife, she was in there too, in the girls' school at Spanish for 8 or 9 years, and it was pretty hard to get along. It had a whole different worldview as compared to those of us that grew up in a non-native town in Little Current. So almost immediately there was conflict there between my brother and I. And with all of those things that were happening, and not knowing as much as we did once we did get started there, but as time went on after that too, we realized, boy, you know, this is what the policy of the government was. And then through all of this, excuse me, through all of this stuff coming out in the media, the residential school, and then the 60s scoop, at least in my mind anyway, I realized just how serious the people, or the government, federal government, was in taking the Indian out of the Indians. And you know, they do that by putting them in some place where they're not able to, or they don't have access to their own language, or their own teachings or way of life, or what we call Anishinaabek, the Indian way of life. But it is somewhat better, because we do have a few that are taken out of their homes there for a while, but they're not just taken, and they're not taken off the reserve anymore and just thrown in somewhere where they don't have access to the Anishinaabek. And then usually the parents know where they are, and they also do have visitation rights, I understand. So like I said, once I lost office, I kind of set my sights on other things that I wanted to do in life, and never really kept track of what was going on too much. But I'm really hopeful and optimistic that with all of this, all of this bad news about residential school survivors, and now with all of these kids, and we had heard bits and pieces growing up, or at least after I got into office. And I married a residential school survivor in 1966, but she never ever talked about that up until she passed away in May 6th, 10 years ago, 2011. And it was only the last couple of years or so that prior to her passing that she started to talk about it a little bit. And the sad thing that she really regretted, and she did make a public statement one day that because they were the authorities over there so aggressive in taking the language of the people that she was ashamed to teach our kids the language, and I was always trying to encourage her because I wasn't that fluent in it myself, and I was learning from her, but she wouldn't teach the kids, and made to be ashamed of that language. So I'm really optimistic and hopeful that things will change for the better. The government hopefully will get, and it's already starting to show too, that they will get more pressure from their own constituents, because they never knew that before. Pretty much all they knew about Anishinaabek way of life or about Indians were from what they saw from the John Wayne movies, Western movies that came across from the States. And even ourselves, we didn't know that we were Indians until we were about 14 years old. We heard the word Anishinaabek, but I mean, when we started hearing about Indians, and then all these movies from the States were coming over, Western movies, and how these savages were killing all these settlers and all that, which 99% of that wasn't even true. It was just made up crap from the I guess I might say the white supremacists of the States at that time. So that's all most of those people knew, and that we were getting everything paid for automatic, everything was paid for hydro, everything was, which isn't true at all. So now I've noticed a change right away where people, 9 out of 10 times now when they're in public, people will nod and they'll smile and they'll speak, not all of them, but the biggest majority of them. And this is only since all of this stuff started coming out and becoming public knowledge to all of the constituents, the non-native constituents of Canada. And now they didn't realize all this nasty stuff that we went through. So that's the reason I'm so optimistic. I already notice a change. And if there's enough pressure given to the government that, we can, like for example, this Kina Gbezhgomi in its existence now today, that we can have that that total authority rather than being blackmailed by the government. You do it our way or you don't get no money. I guess what I could say, and I'm not saying this to blow my horn, but like I said, when I moved to the reserve, I noticed a whole different world view as compared to the ones on reserve. When we were off reserve, we learned to be self-sufficient. If you want something, you work for it. You don't steal, or you don't just sit there and wait for somebody to hand you stuff. And that's what I noticed when I got to the reserve, that the government had really train their people to be so dependent on them. I don't want to sound like I'm blowing my own horn, but what I realized within a little while after moving to the reserve, and then as time went on, it was even more noticeable that anytime the Children's Aid were on a reserve, or the police, or there was some kind of a ruckus or something going on, right till this day, there was never police at my door, for about my kids doing something wrong, or anything that might be against the law, or kids being yanked out of their home, or being threatened to have them taken out of the home. So again, it's a direct result of the colonization, and those like most of those that were on the reserve had went through residential school, and then you get the second and third generation. The first generation, grandparents, and then the parents, and then the third generation. If the first group, the grandparents, they never learned anything over there, how to raise kids. They didn't learn anything about love. And so they didn't have anything good to teach their kids. So just kind of an ongoing snowball effect where these poor people, and it's not that our people are bad, it's just what they learned over there. they didn't know anything about the good part of life. So it's an ongoing situation. There's some real nice people, but they're just hardcore alcoholics there, you know, and their police are at their door. They're almost every weekend or every other weekend, and there's one street up there that we call the war zone, and it's all like immediate relatives, you know, all blood relatives. They get drunk and they're beating up on each other, you know, and this is second and third generation residential school, you know, and you know, what can you do is just try and help them the best you can. They're so far deep in their addictions, and I used to be an alcoholic myself, but I cleaned up my act in August 31st, 1983, and I never looked back. I'm self-sufficient. I really learned a real good work ethic when we were raised off the reserve. And it really came handy in that 20 years that I was in office, because I had lots of energy. It was no time to sit around and grow what some of our people call scone belly. And that's, I don't have much education. I only got a grade 7 education, but I was able to read, and there's so many self-help books out there, you know, that instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, you read that stuff. And I took personal control of my own habits, good and bad. But I gradually weaned out all the bad habits. You know, I don't eat too much. I don't drink anymore. I don't smoke. You know, all of those negative things that affect our body, and also our mental attitude. If we get too much of that chemicalized food, you know, everything is just so detrimental to our physical health. You know, the additives to our food, we've got to be real careful. But for example, as I mentioned, in that my water there is right out of the ground from north of Whibbit. I haven't drank water out of the tap for about 35 years, and that makes the difference. Cleaning out, have a periodic fast, and you got a clearer mind. And for example, one young lady there, probably about 10 years ago or so, I was driving medical transportation, which I still work at yet. And she was asking me on the way to her appointment, she says, "You really look good," she says. You look really healthy. What's your secret?" So I give her some pointers on the way to town. And just before she got off, she says, "Oh, that sounds too difficult." She says, "I'll just wait till I get sick, and then I'll try and do something, eh?" You know, 6 months later, she was diagnosed with diabetes. You know, she's only, at that time, she was only about, I don't know, 35, 38 years old. Probably about 45 now. But those things, you know, how can you help people that have that attitude, you know? All you can do is give them some pointers, and hopefully that someday they'll realize that, oh, that old guy was right. And I might say too that I'm 80 and a half years old, and I don't take any medication at all of any kind. And I got turned off by that system after 1 year on tetracycline. I have something called rosacea on my nose, and sometimes it gets bad on my forehead. But that doctor put me on that stuff for 1 year. I was on there a little over a year, and I read about it in a waiting room, waiting for one of my passengers one time, and Reader's Digest said, "Oh, these antibiotics has a possible side effect, you know, do some damage to your liver." So I went down, made the appointment right away. And that guy had nerve enough, he says, "Well, who put you on that?" Well, I've been getting repeats all this time, and his signature was on there. So I went down, he ordered blood work right away. Sure enough, I had liver damage. I just threw the rest of my prescription away, and I never looked back. And I excuse me, but I've been picking up alternative books, like I said, rather than invent the wheel, reinvent the wheel. And I cleaned it up, and I healed my liver. It came right back to normal there within a year or so. So I think if we had more authority over not only children's aid, but anything that affects us on a day-to-day basis, and start, I guess it could be called decolonization, start learning the Anishinaabe way again, or Anishinaabe Atsu, and try and live a little more healthy. Boy, there's so many of our people are sick. They just, because something tastes good, they'll just, they'll just guzzle it down and eat as much as they can, and the next thing you know, by the time they're 40 years old, they're sick. And when when they're raised somewhere off reserve, they don't learn very much there, other than to take that Indian out of the Indian way of thinking. And that's why, too, our people are so, it seems like we're so far behind. And my daughter and I were talking about this a couple of years ago, my oldest daughter. We could move so much further and faster if we could put our minds together and work as one. But because of all of these different denominations of religions, the residential school stuff that people went through, and we can't even work together. So much jealousy and mistrust, and it's just like staying in one place and spinning our wheels. And I guess that's about all I have to say. And I'm really really optimistic and really hopeful that that all of this bad news now that's coming out there, that we can get a little more support from the general public and start pressuring the government, that we can start doing stuff for ourselves. Our way, not being excuse me, not being threatened with holding money back. Anyway, I guess that's about all I have to say. I hope I'm some help, and Jimmy Witz.